आज हम लोग आईआईटी बॉम्बे में हैं और मेरे साथ हैं जीनन सर। और आज हम लोग कुछ ऐसे विषय पे बात करेंगे जो काफ़ी रेडिकल अप्रोच है टुवर्ड्स एजुकेशन। समझने की कोशिश करेंगे कि जीनन जी इन सारे मुद्दों पे क्यों काम कर रहे हैं इतने सालों से, लगभग 30 साल हो गए, और इसके पीछे का उद्देश्य क्या है। इन सारे सब्जेक्ट पे, इन सारे टॉपिक्स को हम टेबल पे क्यों ला रहे हैं और ये क्यों इम्पॉर्टेंट है हमें अपने लाइफ के चर्चे में लाने के लिए। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, थैंक यू सो मच सर फॉर जॉइनिंग अस टुडे। इट्स अ ग्रेट ऑनर फॉर मी एंड आई एम प्रीटी श्योर दैट हमारे काफ़ी सारे ऐसे लिसनर्स हैं जिन्होंने रिक्वेस्ट किया है कि आपका जो स्टोरी है, स्पेशली आपके लाइफ के जर्नी का जो स्टोरी है, वो सब तक पहुँचे। क्यों आप ऐसे सब्जेक्ट पे काम कर रहे हैं, उसके पीछे का रीज़न आज हम जानने की कोशिश करेंगे। तो लेट्स गो बैक इन टाइम हैं एंड लेट्स हियर फ्रॉम यू योर stories about your childhood.
I will talk about this in terms of our subject. My parents were teachers, and especially my father was very strict. And I never liked going to school. I never liked education. So, not only I disliked my school, I also disliked my home. Because in both places, teaching was happening, and at home it was even more. But luckily, from 5th standard, my father sent me to a hostel, Sainik school. And actually that was very good for me because I kept away from, this strict authoritarian father. And of course the school was also strict, but because there were 30 students, the attention was divided. So I also I didn't do much studies, but I was very good in sports. So I managed, because otherwise normally from a Sainik school they throw you out if you're not good in studies. But I was very good with sports. I was always first and all that. So and they also felt that maybe I will get into military and all that. So even then my interest was also to join army. In fact, in my school days, I used to even write Second Lieutenant KB Jinan. But that was the kind of brainwashing that had happened. And of course, thank God I didn't get into, armed forces.
I just want to stop you here because I am very curious to know कि जब आप आज रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं कि बचपन में you were not interested in education or studies, what would be the reason? क्यों बचपन में, मतलब ऐसा कुछ आप?
It is very difficult to think as a child what I was thinking. But now I understand that if you actually understand the nature of life, the nature of a child, the nature of learning, so this resistance was because we are going against the nature of life and nature of learning. So all children resist force. All children resist teaching. Any kind of teaching, any kind of helping. You just, think that when a little child wants to do anything on their own, when you try to help, they resist it. Even putting a socks or putting chappals, anything for that matter, they don't like to be helped. But the modern educated people don't simply understand the nature of life.
This comes very naturally to the children that they will resist.
Absolutely. Because you see, the nature of life is to be autonomous. Not to become an individualistic, egoistic person. Every living being is learning on their own. It's like digestion. Can anybody else digest food for you? Cognition is also exactly like this. It's a process that is happening within the body. Like food. You acquire food from outside, but once it goes inside, it is within the body. All the process that is happening. Exactly like this. Senses take in information. Once the information goes in, then it is the work of the system to comprehend it, understand it, and give it to you as information, as what is right for life. There's no difference actually.
So, काफी resistance रहा. There was a lot of resistance from your side. What happened then after school life or anything during the school life?
there is, see, school life, of course, as I told you, I was, last and in the class. But, because of my bindas attitude, many of my friends felt, they felt what I'm doing is right, because I never cared. I was getting beaten up and I was getting punishments and all that, but I still resisted, this mindless memorization and all that. Of course, I did. I passed the exam and all that, and then luckily, since I didn't get into army, the next option which is open to most people are, because I didn't have biology, it was to be an engineer. So naturally, I took that route. Not that I liked it at all. So I got admission at this Bhopal, Maulana Azad College of Technology. And the day I reached there, I celebrated my freedom. So within few months, I got into drugs, drinking, all that, because it was some kind of a, rebellion against what society is doing. And not everybody does it. For some reason, to me, I think freedom was the most important requirement, to be free. Not to do anything that I like to do, but to be free as a being. That is different. That, of course, one comes to know very later, that this freedom is not a quest, not that doing whatever you want to do. It is to actually follow what is within you. That is what freedom is. See, the whole problem today is that every understanding that modern educated people have comes from the Western notions about life. And this is the biggest damage that is happening in the world. West is producing absolutely anti-life thoughts and ideas, and the whole of non-Western world is following it up. So this freedom, somehow, at that time I didn't know. So it was just rebelling, And luckily in third year I was expelled. And that expulsion gave me a lot of time. 1 year I was, expelled from the college. So I actually left the hostel also, stayed alone. That gave me a lot of time for reflection as to what is really happening with everything. One thing that became very clear to me was that nobody in the college is truly interested in learning. None of the teachers were interested in learning. I mean, not teaching and, getting good marks. Everybody was concerned about getting good marks, all that kind of stuff. But commitment to learning has nothing to do with marks and all that. That was absolutely missing. I was wondering, what is this happening? We are just dragging life. Other thing that I noticed was that whatever we learn belongs to the Western paradigm. Boyle's law, Charles' law, all kinds of laws, you only hear the West. And I was wondering why this country, nobody created any knowledge. Now, this is not because I am patriotic at all. I don't have any, least patriotic I am. Because I believe that every human being has to be authentic. So this knowledge imposition was something, again, I began to wonder, why is it like this, So luckily, when I was expelled, one friend offered me a place to work in a school. He was running a school. So I stayed in a school for 1 year. I looked at, what is happening to children. And at that time, I also got into a little bit of reading, Gandhiji's Experiments with Truth and a few interesting books like that. This Bertrand Russell's Experiments with Education. So there were interesting things that I began to look at, how people re-looked at education. Then after that year, I went back to the institution. I took the degree, but I took two decisions. One was that never do anything that you don't like to do. Second was that never do 9-to-5 job. So with these two decisions, I went back to college, took the degree, and then next 1 or 2 years, I pretended to look for a job, because but luckily then I got into NID for doing post-graduation. NID was a fantastic place. To me, whenever I think of NID, those 3 years at NID, I imagine like a womb, a second womb in which I began to rebirth myself. What was so interesting about NID was that NID was truly a learning place, learning environment. Nobody was teaching, no compulsion to learn, no tests, no attendance. no exams, but everybody was interested in learning. And students, when they meet each other, they will ask, what are you exploring these days? It is completely unheard of in any other institution. Basically, they will be discussing which movie to go. I mean, that because the general topic of every youth is talking about movie. Na? I think it's the biggest tragedy that when life is all around happening, you have no interest in all that. You have this silly, going after the silly film actors. It's all actually purposely made into a trap. That you don't get engaged with real life. You create this silly, ideas around which actor is doing what and all that kind of,
And
it's actually
continuous consumption of that thing makes you believe कि जो झूठ है वो सच है और सारे अटपटे चीज उसके बाद ही होने लगते हैं.
Absolutely. Nothing, absolute meaninglessness is created in modernity by all this kind of stuff, And of course, and you can look at the kind of life that people are leading, mental, addiction, mind, then rape, every kind of suicide. You see, any indigenous communities, go to any rural tribal area, they have never heard of rape, never heard of mental, suicide, never heard of mental diseases. So all this is actually a product of modernity and modern education and modern institutionalization of everything in life.
Let's आपने indigenous community कहा. So when you first got exposed or you traveled to them, I mean, what was your first experience of indigenous communities learning or?
Yeah, I think better we finish the NID because that is very, very important,
Okay. Yes.
Because
Yes.
that 1 year, that 3 years, I did a lot of experiments with myself, That is what completely shifted my journey altogether, Many incidences. One was that, the fundamental difference between NID, design schools, and regular other institutions is that NID, design schools are fundamentally rooted in experience. Experience is the realm in which you are doing everything, and then they demand creativity from you, which is also not there in any other institution. Third element is that aesthetic sense of beauty needs to be developed. So some of these fundamental aspects which are crucial to life is there in a design school. But the problem is that it is all, framed within the Western understanding of things. It's all trapped in Western notions about education, experience, beauty, and all that. And the tragedy is that there is no research happening in any of the non-Western countries on anything fundamental, or not only anything fundamental, anything at all about. Every research is happening in the Western countries, within the Western framework, and being doled out to other countries, and we distribute it like the way ration shop is, They are only ration shops. They are named as universities or schools, but basically ration shops, distributing knowledge, which West creates. So this is what actually I was able to ask very fundamental questions at NID. And one key thing that I encountered was that the issue of mind dominating the body. It's like this. When you want to design anything, you first plan. You make the plan and then you go and execute it. Which means that first use your head and then use the body. That's how it is, na? So this is something that I began to have some problem with. I felt that I wasn't able to articulate it the way I'm doing now. I knew there was some disturbance within me and I was not happy with the way this is happening. So what I did, I stopped engaging with mind completely. I directly started working with materials, with clay, with wood, probably without knowing anything what I want to do, So I would just take clay and just play with it, And luckily again, the head of the department of ceramics was not allowing me to come inside and work there, which actually on hindsight, I felt, thank God that he didn't want me coming there because I was saved from many of the rules and regulations and tools that are given to to work on clay. So I directly started working with clay and And I can clearly tell you that it is clay that taught me how to work in clay. Because as it's like this, when you make chapati, atta, it is the atta that is telling you how much more water to put or how much more powder to put. No? Because it is through the physical interaction that you understand how things happen. So this is very good that, that I was able to understand this fundamental dichotomy of modernity, which is a mind dominating the body. And I attempted to reverse this process by just beginning to do things, So that is one. Second thing I questioned at NID was that the aesthetic sense is taught like a rule to be applied, and all the rules were made in the West, the Bauhaus. So I began to wonder that if all the aesthetic sense doesn't belong to you, then what belongs to you? That a definition of a culture basically is that you create knowledge, you have your own aesthetic sense, and you have your own value system. It is these three things that constitute what is culture, beauty, knowledge, and value. Now, if you look at the world today, in nowhere this rule is followed, not even in the West. Authentic knowledge creation, it is not happening at all anywhere in the world. Because right from childhood, you're being trained to analyze somebody's information. So I began to look at what is beauty. And so I actually then started working in a nearby institution doing art. I thought maybe there I'll be able to find out something about, beauty and all that. So with this, and because I was interested in handwork, I was also attracted to traditional crafts in India. So that is how my, interest in or my passport to working with rural tribal people began. Otherwise, usually, if you do these kind of studies, then straight you go to West, America is the destination. For me, luckily, rural tribal artisan became my destination. And but initially, I wasn't very sure what I was supposed to do, So after NID, I lived in Calcutta. Calcutta was my base, and I began to work with different kinds of people there. And luckily, I had an invitation to spend some time in Nagaland, Mokokchung, Chuchu Yimlang, the Awo tribes. So that was a time when my reversal began to take place. Because I felt that, and I was working with an NGO wanting to save the Awos, to develop them. But when I went there, I began to question this whole notion that I felt that they are far more civilized, far more humane, far more, the gender equality was hardly there. In fact, it was almost like the women were dominating, They were completely free. And I felt that something is not right with the way that we are looking at this whole idea of development. And so that was the first time, this notion that the educated will have to, work with indigenous or the rural tribal people to help them, to develop them, began to have certain doubts, Of course, I mean, it was only a 2-month or 3-month kind of visit, and nothing much took place. But this journey began actually, And then I went back to Calcutta, and then I was doing all kinds of things. I was sometimes going to some schools and offering workshops as to how to make children creative and all that, So there is clearly a phase in which that we want to save schools and that we want to better education. That kind of phase was there with me, which is what 99% of the modern educated alternative is all about. It's about repairing schools. It is about making things better for children, curriculum development, all that kind of thing. That is the initial phase of my work.
Okay. So we are on a very interesting junction. You just came back from the Nagaland. So what happened after the Nagaland experience?
So as I told you, Calcutta had become my base. I made many friends there. And a lot of people really exploring, interesting things. I also had interesting time with bowls, spent some time with in Shantiniketan. And so on the whole, that was the first time when I had a vibrant experience of, life. People really involved in, not as an institution, but as a culture, no? And I also used to go to some schools, and like everybody else, was trying to better the schools, making children more creative. Those kind of things I was doing. That was clearly, I can clearly see two phases in my this exploration. One is that how to better schools, how to make learning or teaching more interesting, these kind of things. And of course, after that, there was a complete shift in my approach, in which when I began to understand that we are by nature learners. It's in our nature to learn. And that happened in 1991 when I started living with the Potters community in Orissa. A beautiful village I was, that hills all around, green fields, a river nearby. And this village had almost all kinds of artisans, farmers to Thai, then the weavers, I was with the potters, there was this bamboo artisans, then people who take goats, so it was a very vibrant village with all kinds of activities happening. And so initially I used to read a lot of books, anthropology, sociology, philosophy, psychology, all kinds of things, basically to understand what village and what culture is all about. So that is when I felt that it is it's not right. Also because all these writings are from the framework of the West. You look at sociology, anthropology, psychology, all this is framed within the Western framework. And through this framework, I'm supposed to see what is happening in the village. So I stopped reading completely. And the other thing that really that struck me was that the simple fact that literates learn the word, illiterates learn the world. And that became a very, very interesting thing to consider. And I found that, unlike what educated are made to believe, that the illiterate people don't know anything and all that kind of stuff, completely broke down. And I found that they are actually far more creative than the educated, and they are continuously involved in knowledge creation. And the other very important thing that I found was that the way they looked after their children. Absolutely no teaching. Hardly ever they say no to the child. So I understood that freedom is actually to be experienced without anybody giving you freedom. Because freedom is existential. Freedom is not something that somebody can give and take. That's again coming from the Western notion. Freedom is existential reality. Every living being has to exist in freedom. And this freedom is for cognition, to be, to know as an independent being. And this is what I saw in the way the indigenous communities, the non-literate artisans were engaging with their children, or everybody in the illiterate community, whether it was farmer, Vaidya, anybody. There's no teaching at all. Children are never said no. So there is a internal, you don't even engage with the word called freedom. It doesn't exist. Because you're completely free. So this I found very, very beautiful. And I found that by the time they reach around 12 years, most of these young children have become good potters. So you see, there's no teaching at all. They're completely free, and they are doing all kinds of activities, and they're physically completely fit. So I began to actually document what is happening in the context of children in indigenous communities. This documentation began in 91. And I probably might have about 4,000-5,000 videos and short, 100,000s of images on children. And And the reason for also documenting was that I realized that if I have to communicate with the literates, I have to show them examples of what I'm talking about. Otherwise, they will misinterpret everything that I would say, because they are trapped in language. They will make up their own stories in the head because they don't have any experiential basis for understanding anything. So I found it is extremely important that I keep documenting what children do. And so from this documentation, I was actually able to decode or understand that what actually children do is actually to understand the real world and the process that is given by life to do it. So it's not something that humans have discovered like modern education. It is so natural, like breathing, digestion and all that. Comprehending the world is so natural. And that is why senses are given. So I began to explore how these things function, and I began to see a very, very interesting pattern emerging from all this documentation that I've done. Yeah? So what differs is the content. It's like this, that you speak Bengali, somebody else speaks Marathi, somebody else speaks Malayalam or English, Hindi. The content is different, but the process is the same. Because, these days people say there are different ways of knowing, And I'm really amazed at how foolish that such a statement is. It's like telling there are different ways of digesting food. You can eat different food, different things, but the process of digestion remains the same. There will be minor differences depending on what you're eating, Agar sweet खाएगा तो उसका ही असर होगा, salt की खाएगा तो कुछ, But fundamental process is same. The same with cognition. So this whole idea is nothing but mind created nonsense actually.
तो ये कब से आया, मतलब मैं कैसे समझूं कि ये किसी ने बनाया है? It has been purposely designed to
No. It is not purposely designed. It is actually, so there are two areas of my research, fundamental areas of my research. One is the biological basis for human existence. How value, beauty and knowledge is fundamentally rooted in life, in the biology of our beings. It is not whatever you think. It's not a mind-created thing. It's the need of life itself. See, this whole idea of sustainability belongs to life. Life is wanting to sustain life. Within that, there are all kinds of things happening. But fundamentally, if you look around, what is it that every living being is doing? A plant, everything is somehow trying to procreate and sustain life. And that is the basis for value, So one area of my research is how we are biologically based human beings. Second thing is the fundamental damages of modernity. And I take it to the beginning of printing press as modernity. You see, people have this mistaken notion that people were literate long time ago. No. There were very, very, very few people who were able to read and write. And it was like a craftsman's skill. Very few people knew how to write. And it was like a skill, learned skill. Only few people can do. Scribes.
Yeah, like a drawing.
Absolutely. Even drawing that way, Patachitra or, all that, there were very few people did drawing in that sense. So they were artisanal activities. And reading was also conducted in a completely different way. Because reading was always done aloud. Because there were people to listen. So the fundamental space for language was not denied. Meaning it is something to be spoken about and something to be heard. So the change actually takes place after the printing press was established and it got such popularity. You see, it was in the end of the 14th or 14th century that the printing press was established. It was in Germany. Then it took 300 years for it to spread into the main Europe. That to main Europe. I don't think even the rural areas of Europe was, literate. And you can very clearly understand this by looking at what they call as their history. It is in the 1800s, they say that age is called age of reason. And people have, without understanding what is this reason, have been celebrating this. See, one important thing that people have not understanding is that reasoning is an activity you can only do with what is known. In the realm of unknown, reason has no role at all. Which means the age of reason coincides with existence of ready-made knowledge. And this ready-made knowledge is because of books. So, on a large scale, people began to engage with ready-made knowledge. And when you engage with ready-made knowledge, you don't need observation, you don't need any other faculty, you don't need intuition, you don't need anything like that. The only activity that is demanded of you when you read something is reasoning. That is why reasoning became important. And reasoning, conscious reasoning, inherent reasoning is always present because it's part of life. You know, like if you look at your mother tongue, you learned your mother tongue without knowing grammar, without knowing any word, without, organizing the way it should be structured, you're able to speak. Which means reasoning or the organization is inherent. Correct, no? So people have not really understood what is this thing called reason. And also see, one very important thing that is to be understood is that in a non-literate human being, all senses are giving inputs. And from this input, insights are happening and knowledge is getting developed. It is not a linear process. But the moment you enter into linear process through language, your input is language, your output is language. Yeah? So the whole processing is reasoning. Whereas when the senses are giving inputs to you, all kinds of inputs are happening. And you are not aware of it. Again, if you refer back to your mother tongue learning, this becomes very clear. And people don't understand that in learning of mother tongue, learning of the world has already taken place. It is on top of that mother tongue is learned. Meaning the senses have already established connection with the world. It is on top of this that mother tongue gets laid. So the senses have already seen things, heard things, So when you say this is mango, you already know what mango is. So actually mother tongue learning is a fantastic example of how the mind and body are functioning together. How the word and the world are integrated. At a very core level, you can understand that living is verb and language is noun. At a very core level. Understand? Because language is nothing but description of the way we are living. So the life is far more important than language. But for the literates, it is reversed. For them, body doesn't exist because senses have never worked. They are continuously staying in the mind. So actually the whole modern crisis of why human beings have turned against their own body, their life, the life that is around, how they have become destructive, all can be understood in one single issue. That instead of learning the real world, you're learning the word. You have no idea about the world at all.
And how destructive is learning in a different language other than mother tongue?
That is why asking which hand do you want to cut, right or left?
Okay.
You see, medium
is not the issue here.
At all. Because medium, actually what you're learning is the real world. It doesn't require medium. Communication, you require, medium, that language. Cognition has nothing to do with language. You see, the modern system thinks that language is a higher cognitive function. To me, I don't see it that way at all. To me, there is something called primary cognitive source and secondary cognitive source. Primary cognitive source is the world, is the real world. And it can only be accessed through senses. Language cannot understand this at all. Once I know what you say is mango, then the word mango becomes meaningful to me, not otherwise. Understand? Na? So the language can only play a secondary role once the body is connected with the real world and understood what is the reference. It's only representation. That's not what it is. So you have to engage with what is and then have words for that. You see? It's common sense actually. But because we have been going in this direction, people find it strange. Simple words like experiential learning, all absurd things actually. Because experience is what you are is experience. There is not even one fraction of a second you can be out of your experience. Then what is the thing called experiential learning, which is opposed to non-experiential learning? To me, experience is learning. There's no division. What you experience is what you learn. You see, if there is a proper study on how body imbibes knowledge, because see, the whole modern cognitive science is very biased. It's only looking at the way mind is functioning. Understand? First of all, in the initial stage, if you see the development of cognitive science, why cognitive science got developed itself was to make machines, intelligent machines. Not to understand, yeah, absolutely, artificial intelligence. It has nothing to do with understanding human mind and how cognition works. And in the initial phase, body was not at all important. But when they felt that what they have understood needs a body, which is a robotics, that is when they realized that body is important. You actually study development of cognitive science in the modern this thing. This is the way it is developed. So it is a mind's need that the body is required. It's not body's, primacy. It's not understood even now. So there is, especially in cognitive science and understanding of children, I think what the West is telling is absolute nonsense.
And why so? Is there a particular reason or?
No. See, they're not purposely doing it. The thing is that the moment, if you look at what literacy does to you, it becomes very clear. What literacy does is that when literacy became the central aspects of modern culture, children became naturally inferior and incapable. They began to be considered as people who are not capable. Because it is through language that you learn the world. But in the illiterate communities where senses are primary, you don't need mediation, you don't need help. So children became, beings that need help in literate world. Understand? So that is when the first lowering of children's, started. You see, in none of the indigenous communities, children are treated like this. They are treated with absolute respect. They are never said no. See, no is a violence against somebody. When you tell no, it's a violence. I mean, imagine this, at even older age, nobody would want to, you don't want to be told no.
Immediate there will be retaliation, anger.
So why do you think children also don't feel it? That's because they are very, very physically not capable. You think you can do anything with them. So again, I want to tell you that there is no villain in this. There is a very, very strong, it's nothing, I really believe that we are victims of our conditions. See, one very important thing we must understand is that unlike animals, human beings when they are born, they have a system, but there's no content in that. Their operating system is somewhat ready, but not the softwares. That has to be installed. I mean, installed in such a way that even your ability to walk, even your ability to use your senses needs to be awakened. Don't take it for granted that your eyes will function if the child is kept in a dark place for 1 month, 2 months. Understand? Hearing. If the child doesn't hear anything for a few months in the initial stage, the sense of hearing will not work. So even the ability to walk needs to be awakened, otherwise the children will crawl. There are very, very interesting examples of feral children in this, There is a child who was looked after by dogs because parents were drunk all the time. And she was discovered when she was around 9, 10 or something like that. And she was walking, barking, everything like a dog, licking water, but she doesn't know how to eat. She was walking, jumping the way a dog is walking, barking, no language. You understand? So unlike animals, we need very, very conducive environment for our awakening. But the thing is that we have two possibilities. We can be conditioned, we can be awakened. Conditioning is against our nature, against our potential. Whatever happens is against the potential. Awakening is our potential is enhanced. Like children in Bangalore slums can speak 4 languages. No teaching at all. But the moment you begin to teach, you kill that ability to speak. That's what's happening to most of us now. How we are speaking English. Because they started with grammar, they started with meaning of words. Because there is a way language can be learned. That is a natural way. It begins with hearing. Without even knowing any meaning. It is a sound, it's the way, it's the form that first you imbibe. That's what children do now. They hear a word, they repeat it without knowing the meaning. But they repeat it exactly the way it is heard. So their preoccupation is with the way you speak. Not what you speak, not the content, not the meaning. So they imbibe the way it is. That is the accent. That's the first thing a child learns. Then slowly, they begin to make sense. That when you say pen, you take out a pen, you understand how this is what he means by pen. There's a very interesting exploration of this in Helen Keller's, Anne Sullivan's, teaching of Helen Keller. The confusion between jug, water and tap. How she was mixing with the mug that was holding water. So it's very interesting how Helen got very excited when she was able to touch water and understand this is called water, Understand, huh?
Okay, we'll stop here.